Alrighty, it's about 2 after. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We will be talking about navigating copyright and fair use in our CIO ETI Teaching with Technology Brown Bag series. I'm very honored to be joined by Sarah Stanton from OGC, Allison Rollins from the Learning Resource Center, and Dr. Jeffrey Longacre. I'm Dr. Dina Kurzweil, and I'll be kicking us off today, but a few rules of engagement. Everybody should be on mute at this time. So if you have any questions, please feel free to go into the chat and ask your questions. Our plan for today is to actually provide time at the end of the session to actually address any questions and open up the mic a bit if the group is not too large. So next slide, please, Linda. So our objectives for today are really to have you be able to accurately do things like define copyright, to recognize the 4 factors considered in fair use. We also want you to be able to describe a new resource that we've created called the LibGuides. This is a brand new resource that was put together as a collaboration between Dr. Longacre, the LRC, and the ETI team that we're part of. We also would like you to be able to describe some of the Copyright Clearance Center services. We think that having you get an understanding of that will be very important as you start to develop these skills. And also, we'd love for you to value the importance of copyright and fair use. You'll notice at the bottom here that I've acknowledged the fact that all of our images are from Adobe stock and approved from Adobe stock, or we created them internally. So our plan for today, as I started to say earlier, was we're going to do 30 minutes, about 30 minutes of review of content and videos, and then we're going to leave time, hopefully 30 minutes for questions and discussion. We know this is a really rich and deep topic where you may have a lot of questions. So we're hoping to be able to answer a lot of those since we have experts on the team here. I am now going to turn it over. Linda, next slide.
All right. Welcome all. So what is copyright? Well, it's the right to copy, and it's a protection that's provided by the laws of the United States to the authors of original works of authorship. Now, this includes literary, dramatic, musical, artistic, and certain other intellectual works, and it's a right that's available to both published and unpublished works, and it even includes widely available material. So just because you find material on the web or the internet doesn't mean that you have the right to copy it. This symbol that you see here is a super cool symbol, and it feels really powerful to stick it on things, but the symbol itself isn't necessary for someone to claim copyright. Next slide, please. So in terms of copyright basics, it's under Title 17 of the U.S. Code, and it's the right of the author to control works for a limited period of time. Now, since I've been born, and it's been quite a while, I just turned 40 this year, the protection is in place for works created after that time. The protection is in place for the life of the author plus 70 years after the author's death. So the authors are able to control up to that period of time. Now, interestingly, in the past year, copyright protection, in the last session, if you attended this, you may have heard us say it's not available for U.S. government works. However, a few things have changed over the past year, and now there is a new law that allows certain covered authors of covered works to be protected. So if your colleague at a military institution, a different academic entity creates a certain work that's determined to be covered, it might protect that work, but it doesn't apply to the works here at USU. That doesn't mean that the government is not precluded from receiving copyright or purchasing or being assigned copyrights from others, but we don't copyright our own work, government work product.
So as Sarah started to discuss, a lot of things are actually copyrighted and protected by copyright law. And this includes things, as you know, like literary works and even musical works. A lot of you remember probably legal actions happening about spoofing of music and the use of different tunes in different areas. But it also, unfamiliar to many people, includes the actual accompanying words. Plays, dramatic works are all copyrighted, including the music that goes along with them. pantomimes, choreographed works, the choreography involved in a work are also copyrighted. Any type of graphic, structural works, architecture, sound recordings, anything can really be copyrighted. And it's really important that you take a look and really do your due diligence to go in and find out if something is copyrighted. One word of note, you may hear a small buzzing sound on my end. My computer fan is actually running, so it's not a happy camper. I'm going to say next slide and turn it back over to Sarah.
All right, so what is fair use? Oftentimes I have faculty coming into my office thinking that fair use is a get out of jail free card for anybody in academia. It is not that. What it is a legal doctrine that promotes freedom of expression by permitting some unlicensed use of copyright protected material in certain narrow circumstances. And there's a statutory framework that lists 4 specific criteria that they think of, and also perhaps sometimes a 5th one, that judges consider in determining whether or not something is a fair use. It's often for things and purposes such as criticism, comments, news reporting. Certainly teaching and scholarship and research is part of that, but there are a number of factors that need to be considered. And just because it's teaching, scholarship, or research doesn't mean that you're allowed to use any amount of material for any use that you want. Next slide, please.
So a super fun overview of copyright in less than 5 minutes. Always fun. Linda, next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the fair use factors, which there are 4 of. The first factor we're going to talk about is the transformative factor. The factors that you're going to hear about should not be balanced mechanically, but weighed together in light of the purposes of copyright. Considering these factors may actually help those who wish to use copyrighted material begin to predict whether judges, I mean, we're talking the law here, would consider a specific use to be fair use. Has the material you taken from the original work been transformed by adding a new idea or meaning? Well, we're going to cover this in this slide a little bit. Was there value added to the original work by creating new information, new aesthetics, new insights or understandings? In a parody, for example, a parody transforms the original work by holding it up to ridicule. At the same time, the work does not become a parody simply because the author models characters after those found in a famous work. So let's take a look here at an example. AP claimed infringement of copyright over the use of the original image that you see here. What they don't claim is the fact that they may not even own the copyright to the image. The photographer actually owns the right. AP never contracted with the photographer ownership. He was a temporary hire and had no contract by him or the AP that would transfer ownership of the image over to the Associated Press. Therefore, before AP could actually establish ownership, they had to actually think about a legal case in and of itself. Second, the fact is the current image in the press shown around the world is not the entire photograph that Manny Garcia took of Obama. The original image was Obama sitting by George Clooney. He was at a fundraising event at the National Press Club in D.C. Third is the fact that Ferrier took the cropped proposed image and significantly altered it. He not only altered the image by transforming it into a very graphic and abstract version of the original, he altered the content and the purpose. So he created a new work based on the original by adding new expressions and meaning. So why is this important? Because many artists will use other people's images for inspiration and transform those images into new works of art. Anybody who's clipped pictures out of a magazine to make a collage has done exactly that. And those wallpaper designs and catalogs count as well. So in this particular piece, there was no copyright infringement going on here.
All right, so the second factor is the nature of the copyright work. And the second factor is typically the least important of the 4 fair use factors. Because the dissemination of facts or information benefits the public, you have more leeway to copy from factual works such as biographies than you do from fictional works like plays or novels. In addition, you'll have a stronger case of fair use if you copy the material from a published work than an unpublished work. So the scope of fair use is narrower for unpublished works because the author has a right to control the first public appearance of his or her expression. Interestingly, so there's an interesting case way back in the 70s where former President Gerald Ford contracted with Harper and Row publishers to publish his memoirs. And Harper and Row negotiated a pre-publication release with Time magazine to excerpt 7,500 words from those memoirs to place in their magazine. But before Time magazine got a chance to get it out there in the public, a different entity, what was that, Nation magazine, got some behind the scenes copy of it and published approximately 300 words from that manuscript. Was that copyright infringement? Well, before this time, there weren't all the statutory factors that there are now. And the court said, even though it's 300 words, and even though this wasn't published, these were 300 really important words because they spoke about the factors in the presidential pardon of Richard Nixon. And it was quite a monetary interest of this entity. And so indeed they found that this was the verbatim excerpt of even just 300 words from a whole book was not protected by fair use and was a violation of copyright. Another factor of the nature of the copyright work is also the creativity and how creative it was. So the government was sued by an architectural firm that created some designs for a post office. And the owner of that copyright that was registered said, hey, you can't keep creating all these new post office. You're infringing on my copyright. I built you a building and now all these buildings look a lot like it. Well, actually, it was built based on government specs and specific styles that the Bureau of Indian Affairs had said needed to be used. And so because the other government buildings were different with respect to color and style and pattern and the creative elements of things, it didn't infringe on copyright and it was considered to be a fair use. Next slide, please. So an effect on the potential market. One case that I read was between Sony and Universal Studios way back in the 80s when people were using videotape recorders and video cassette recorders. And there was you go after the money. So you're not necessarily going to be lucrative if you're suing, a single mom with no money who uses Napster. If anybody remembers the press when I think she was ordered to pay $2 million for downloading music and copying it without paying the owner of that. So in this case between Sony and Universal Studios, they were suing because Sony created videotape recorders. And so they were contributing to copyright violations by allowing people to copy TV shows that they could watch later. And of course, as you would all suspect, ultimately the court decided that Sony was not violating or contributory infringers of copyright by merely marketing devices that could allow people to copy things. So that wasn't a violation. But if you are impacting somebody's livelihood and their bread and butter in a commercial enterprise, it's much less likely to be considered a fair use.
Generally speaking, when we're talking about fair use, there's this idea about the amount, focus, and sustainability of the portion taken. So the greater amount of work that's used, the more likely that it will have an issue, okay? If you use less, it's more likely to be considered fair use. Previously, courts endorsed the 10% rule. So if a person uses less than 10% of the total work, or one chapter of a book, if the book has 10 chapters, it could be fair use. But if what you take is the actual focus of the work, as Sarah was just describing, the heart of Ford's work there, you're probably going to have a problem even if it's less than 10%. So while you may see this in a lot of places, it doesn't actually hold up as just a number and a figure. There are a lot of other things around it that you need to take into consideration.
Okay, so the final factor, and I think this is on the next slide, is good faith. So some courts will identify that fifth factor and say that if you acted in good faith, you're probably covered by fair use. You're not automatically covered by fair use, as we've said several times, just because you're using it for teaching and educational purposes. So if you have questions about that, just reach out to our OGC office and we'll help you decide, is this really right or not? I think we do this on a regular basis. So just call us, or if you have questions, just ask the person who produced the material.
So again, just to reiterate, the factors are not to be balanced mechanically, but weighed together in light of the purposes of copyright. Considering these factors may help those who wish to use copyright materials begin to predict whether a judge would consider a case to be fair use or not. But just because one of them actually is wiped out and the other three don't have a strong case, the determination actually, if it should come down to something, is really going to sit with a judge. So like Sarah said, we have the Office of OGC here, and it's better off to be safe than sorry when it comes to copyright, because too much could happen.
Okay, so although the copyright law doesn't generally require a user to attribute the source of material, such attribution is more likely to demonstrate the user's good faith. And it's also often required as a matter of academic ethics, as well as under the terms of Creative Commons license and other licensees. So many people mistakenly believe that it's permissible to use a work or a portion of it as long as you acknowledge that work. They think it's okay to use a photo in a magazine as long as you write, on that slide that where you took it from, but that's not true. Just acknowledging it may be a consideration in the determination of fair use, but it's not indicative and it won't protect us against a claim of copyright infringement. So when in doubt, not only acknowledge the source, maybe seek the permission of the copyright owner. So unless you have direct permission from the original source or copyright holder, you can't implement another's work just because someone else has used it before you. So even if, you rotated out active duty the person before you use those slides, if there's nothing in the slides that indicated that they got the permission to use it, do your due diligence, cite appropriately, make sure that you're asking, do we have the right to do it? How did we get it? And for what purpose? Was it a one-time use, or can I use it again and again in this teaching? So just ensure you are responsible, our faculty members, for ensuring the copyright that you use is free from copyright infringement. You alone, with the guidance of all of us who want to help. And this is a snapshot of our former copyright homepage that is no longer available to us. So at some point, we will be placing something on our internal OGC website to provide all this wealth of resources that we have for you. So stay tuned for that. Next slide, please. Over to you, Allison, I think.
Yes, thank you. So I'm excited to be able to talk today about the Copyright and Fair Use LibGuide. This guide is hosted on the LRC's website, and it serves as a resource for the entire USU community. While the guide will reiterate a lot of the points that we've talked about so far today, it also provides some useful information that goes beyond what we were able to kind of fit into this one session. When you go to this guide, I hope that one of the first tools you'll visit is our fair use checklist. This is concise, it's printable, and you can use it when you're trying to make a fair use analysis. So it includes those elements, those 4 factors, nature, purpose, amount, and effect, and it lists elements that might be weighed for or against when you're making a fair use determination. While you're on this page, I also hope that you'll check out our discussion on the Creative Commons. We have some links to ebooks there, and we even provide a little quiz if you want to test your knowledge. No grades are collected, but you're welcome to use this as a chance to kind of see if you are as comfortable with copyright and fair use as you think you are. So many of the questions that we get end up being about images, that we also created a tab, a kind of a subpage that talks just about images. So when you click on the Images tab from the Copyright and Fair Use LibGuide, you're going to find a page that lists both the methods and some recommended resources that you might want to check out. So on the left-hand side, you're going to see some suggestions on how to actually find out who is the copyright owner. Sometimes it's not immediately obvious, and there are some tips there for how you might go around discovering that. We also provide some guidelines on where you can find out how to provide proper citation or attribution. And we have a 10-second tutorial on how to use Google Images to discover images that may have reduced or no copyright limitations. On the right-hand side of that past page, you're going to see that we provide a lot of links that go to resources that you can use to find copyright that's either free or it might be covered by US use licenses. For example, when you're getting images from the US government, from the Creative Commons, or that's in the public domain, you generally don't need to worry about those copyright restrictions. And on this slide, what you're going to see is that we have some examples from US federal agencies and the Creative Commons that kind of illustrates the kind of the variety of different types of images that you'll be able to find. But as a quick warning, as Sarah mentioned, not everything that's produced by the US government is going to be without copyright restrictions. So you will want to kind of do your due diligence and do a little bit of research to make sure there aren't any exceptions. So when the image that you really need to use is covered by a copyright license, it's a good idea to be prepared to either pay a fee or to work with the publisher or the copyright owner or to wrestle with some restrictions before you use the tools. That said, the university does have licensed content which has material that you can use for class presentations or for internal use without any additional effort. So unfortunately, the rules tend to change from publisher to publisher or content provider to content provider. So you'll want to read the terms of service for each of those resources, and then you'll want to check them every time you maybe revisit a class to make sure that they're still current. So for example, I have this picture that I am using of a graph from Clinical Key, and Clinical Key's terms of use allows me to use this content for scholarly use, provided that you keep intact all copyright and other proprietary notices. And they actually format it for me and produce a slide, which is what you see on that screen. So in this case, there's actually those disclaimers take up quite a bit of space. So a final resource that I hope that you'll take away from this session today is the Copyright Clearance Center. So the university publishes kind of a blanket license that's negotiated by the Copyright Clearance Center to a whole host of titles, books, ebooks, journals, e-journals. It's linked on the LRC's main homepage under our featured resources. You can click on that link and then search the Copyright Clearance Center to find a journal or book title. You can also search by ISBN number. The Copyright Clearance Center is going to tell you if that title is covered by their license, and it's going to tell you about the terms of use. So it's going to say you're allowed to use it perhaps in course reserves or Sakai or Canvas, like an LMS system. So in this case, if you search for New England Journal of Medicine, their terms allow you to use it for internal presentations, e-reserves, or an LMS system. And you wouldn't have to contact the Massachusetts Medical Society to get that permission. It's covered by the Copyright Clearance Center license. But you will want to make sure that you check in every year because that license is renegotiated every year to make sure you're still covered.
Hi, everybody. So as you heard Allison talk about, there's a lot of different resources in the Copyright Clearance Center to let you use materials for your teaching. But a question that we get a lot of times is, well, can I embed this into the LMS or can I embed this into a course site? And I'll tell you right off the bat, most copyright holders are not going to be happy with an embedding piece. It is safer to link out to a site that holds the copyright material over embedding it into an LMS or into a page or anything like that that actually just pushes out the actual final piece. So providing the link is a safer way to do it, but it does, as Allison was saying, provide some maintenance pieces for you so that every year or every time you're offering it, you want to be sure that that link is still working. Just like with the Copyright Clearance Center, things change. And so you need to check on that yearly. So some themes for today. Fair use does not automatically cover you because you're teaching. And you have a responsibility to actually check. And you do have help. You have resources in the LibGuides. And getting to yes, well, you're not alone. Ask for help. We are here. You have external affairs, Dr. Longacre. You have OGC here, Sarah Stanton, LRC, Allison Rollins, and the ETI, myself. We are all here to help you figure this out and send you to the right person if we don't know the answers. So I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide. We're going to move into questions. Next slide, please, and some of our references here. So I'm going to go ahead and if you could stop sharing, we are going to take some questions. There were some already provided in the chat that I am going to put out there. I think Nick Hamlin, and if I mess up your name, I'm sorry, right off the bat, you said, like Andy Warhol, Campbell's soup. I would defer that to Sarah, as my understanding is that Andy actually did get sued and that he had to do some things out of court. To help him understand, he needed to ask permission, but I would refer that to Sarah if my understanding is wrong.
I'll do my homework and do some legal research. The next copyright briefing, I'll tell you the story of Andy Warhol. So thanks for the suggestion.
Another question for Regina Day. If we need to present published manuscripts to a class, do we send the list of manuscripts to someone to check whether or not we can present them? Something like data analysis or discussion of experimental techniques. So I think one of the things you're going to need to think about, and again, I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues as well. My take on this, because I don't have the full context, and context matters a ton in what you're planning on doing. First off, I would say that if you're having the class look at published manuscripts, you would actually send them to the LRC to get those manuscripts. You provide them a list of different manuscripts and have them go there and get it themselves. A, that reinforces kind of research skills. And B, make sure that all the manuscripts you're asking them to look at are actually provided in the LRC. But I'll turn it over to Allison and Sarah to add some more to that.
Yeah, we can, the LRC, the Copyright Clearance Center often explicitly states things are okay for e-reserves, and the library, and also like Sakai. So if you can send a list of those titles, the LRC can help you put those titles in e-reserves, or we can, or help you put them on Sakai. And we can also, if we don't have access to something, we can try to work on finding a solution with the publisher. You might have to pay a licensing fee to make it available.
I have nothing to add. Head to the LRC first.
So we have another question here. If we modify a diagram for external use in adult education, again, that has a lot of contextual issues that need to be wrapped around that. If I were using a diagram that was not facts-based, you would probably have to ask for permission. And again, you're going to want to check with OGC on this because I don't have your full context, but my initial gut to just what you wrote is, yeah, you're doing it for teaching, but if it's a diagram that isn't fact, it could be copyrighted. Thank you, Philip, for that question. Would we only need the PDFs, not printed manuscripts for students? Most of these would be downloaded from the internet by the students. We usually make figures in PowerPoint so we can discuss the figures. Yeah, I would actually take that up with Allison and Sarah and get more into the context and the situational use cases. Just because that's so specific to what you're trying to do and what's going on in those actual outcome pieces.
Yeah, and usually it's best, as we said, to send the link instead of sending the PDF when you can. Over.
Yeah. So any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Sarah, sorry.
I was going to say that if you want to use something from that perhaps you've like maybe you've downloaded a PDF from the LRC and it was in one of our collections, some of the collections that we have will allow you to use them in PowerPoints for teaching so long as it's internal use. You're just going to have to look at the terms of use from that that kind of collection to make sure that it's all right. So it might be, so an example, if you were using Clinical Key, we have a ton of journals that are included in that collection, and they will allow you to use them in PowerPoints for discussion. So you might be covered by that, or if you looked it up in the Copyright Clearance Center, it might say, oh, you're fine if it's for a presentation. So those are two avenues. And if you have any questions, please, we're happy to help. Thank you for asking, though.
So another thing, question I haven't seen here, but I know something that happens a lot is a lot of people will put down an ISBN number or a DOI number or an ISN number as the reference. And I want to be sure everybody realizes that's not good enough. You actually need to use a particular style, reference style, in order to reference anything that you are using from somewhere else, just like you would in any type of formal writing situation. A DOI and some sort of formal writing situation isn't going to cut it for any publisher. So even in a presentation, you're going to need to do a full reference to what you're actually doing. So what other questions? Anybody want to come off mute and ask something verbally?
Hi, this is Ayana Shivers. I have a question, I guess, regarding copyright for materials that we create. I know that was mentioned early on in the presentation, but some of the materials that we're creating are as contractors. And so, I know we've, Dr. Longacre's probably seen a couple of email back and forths about this. And, I'm just wondering if there's a standard rule around what we could consider copyright, and in lieu of copyright, do you suggest putting like preferred citations of materials that are used, that we can direct our partners and people who want to use our materials? Is there like standard language we can give them for that, or is it considered a copyright?
So I'm going to push this over to Sarah, but I will say a lot of that is going to depend on probably the terms of your contractor contract with the U.S. government. I am not aware of any kind of language you could use because it would then be falling under whatever that contract rule was as to who owns copyright. But Sarah would be the expert in this. And if you were to come to me, I'd probably be doing just this, saying, this is my thoughts, but talk to Sarah.
Exactly. So I will often advise the government employees that if you're doing joint work and creating something with a contractor, that contractor is going to be able to reach out to their legal counsel and ask whether it's appropriate to copyright that material or not. And of course, the government, if it's a government funded work and under our cooperative agreements and our contracts, the government will have the rights to use that sort of material, but that doesn't mean that the government owns the copyright. And we have a USU instruction that kind of explains that and talks about what the government can do and say about materials that are created by the government or created by others. So it is a bit of a case by case depending on all of those things. If it's more than just facts, original works of art, things of that nature. So there's no one set thing to state for anything. It's really case by case. Did I answer that question thoroughly enough?
Yes. I think just sometimes we're concerned that we're, over leveraging you all's time, and just didn't know if there was maybe like a blanket for specific things. But it sounds like, case by case, and that'll be, the rule from now on.
Great, thank you.
And in a lot of these things, don't be surprised if it is a case-by-case situation, because the devil is in the details in a lot of this. And, we have a great group in our OGC staff to really help us navigate that and be sure that we are covered. I know there was a survey actually put in the chat. So if you're planning on heading out, please be sure you provide us your feedback and take that survey. It helps us think about what we're doing in the future and how we've done it here. But again, if you have another question, please feel free to unmute yourself, and we're here to answer some questions.
Dina, this is Jeff Longacre. I'll make a quick comment as far as, first of all, I want to thank everybody who participates in this. this is great because the people who participated are usually the folks that are leaning forward and staying ahead and interested and conscientious. And so kudos to you for working this into your busy schedules. I think it's fair to say that we're all, this whole process is a learning process it's a living process because we're trying to catch up and keep up with technology and changing rules and regulations. And so we're just trying to make sure that you all are protected in the best way possible when you do your academic work, because we have some really great stuff coming out here. And we want to make sure that we don't undermine and sabotage that by making, tripping you up. Some of the things we may even, as Ms. Stanton said earlier, questions, we're going to need to take that for advisement, go do our homework and come back with you because this is all living and we're all learning with it. And so like on the copyright, Ms. Shivers asked as far as, that's a great question because I have to go to the lawyers and ask the same question. And, they said contractors can make copyright. It's like, oh, so the government person can't, but the contractor can on the same particular work. Well, if it's their own original work in their own area of expertise, yes. But if they're talking about the center, which is a government entity, then no. So there are things like that I think we're all learning. It depends on the individual presenting, what the topic of the presentation is. Recently, one with Ms. Stanton we had to go to, you can't copyright, like there was a PowerPoint presentation, they wanted to copyright the whole PowerPoint presentation. So the first question that came up is, what in there do you want to copyright? Is there a particular diagram? Is there a particular, or do you really want to copyright the whole thing? So I think as Dina and Allison, everybody was mentioning, there's so much context to this. And so when sometimes we raise a flag or something, we're just here to work through it. If the other thing is it's so complicated, I wrote down a couple big 20,000 foot pearls that I took away from this. First of all, attribution of something does not equal permission. I think we all need to take that away because folks are getting better and better of attributing a photograph or a graphic, but that does not imply permission every time. So I think that's a key point to take away. The other one is, it's really interesting, and the folks on here are probably already past this step, but the other 1,000 that hadn't participated, is that public domain does not equal the web. But there are a lot of folks who live thinking that the web equals public domain. Those are not equivalent terms. And so I think that those, in all honesty, if, over the next 6 months to a year, we can get past these big rocks, we're doing great stuff as far as, putting those things together. So every photo, every graphic, every table, think about it. Okay, does this need permission? Just because it's on the web, it's not free. It's not something that I can take without attribution. And just starting, and if we can do that 99% of the time, we'll be making some great gains. So I'll quit talking, and thanks for the opportunity. Thanks again for participating and putting this on to you all. Appreciate it.
I'm aware some of you are having issues with the actual link. We're going to look into that. It may be that your installation is actually blocking you. I would respectfully ask if you could take a minute, copy it, and do it maybe when you're off base. We really want your feedback. And we're going to look into a more global way of getting us that feedback. Maybe we'll use like SurveyorMonkey next time. Also here, Linda just placed a link to Panopto, which is a folder within our video streaming service that has all the different sessions that we've offered in the previous brown bags. This session will be added to it in the next few weeks. So if you have a colleague that you're like, hey, you should check this out, this was important, take that link that Dr. McCauley just put in the chat that starts with, that has Panopto in it, and put it aside and feel free to share it with your colleagues here at USIS or across any of the military organizations here. Any other questions?
Another thing, Dina, is a big part of this was to help to start give folks tools. And like Allison went through some of the like LibGuides and that sort of stuff, is to not just it's never fair to just say, okay, we're tightening the reins and don't give you any tools to help you as those reins tighten. So there's some great tools out there. However, if you come across something and you find that it's legitimate for us to post and it was helpful to you, please send that to Allison and Nesris, because you may find out in the trenches that you found something that's really helpful, and we need to add that so that other people can see it. So we want to partner with you so that you also are part of this. We're at an education institution. It's the beauty of being here. We all learn something every single day so that we can teach each other something. And if you come across something that will help your colleagues and help all of us, please give that to us. Thanks.
That's really a great point. Thank you so much. Yeah, anything that you find that you really think will be value to your peers, we're very happy to add it to the guide. This is a document that can grow and evolve over time and really kind of fit the needs of USU.
So I put the link to the LibGuide in the chat. Again, copy it and put it someplace for yourself. There was also a comment here about students. Yeah, it's so important to make sure our students understand how this works. This link will be available to them as well, so feel free to share this with them. And again, they can come to us with questions also. If you're interested in having us do a modified piece for a particular group of students, we're happy to do that. We're really here to help you, to provide a resource. You know, I'm not a lawyer, Allison's not a lawyer, but we know a lawyer, and she's here, and she can really help us deal with these challenges that we have. And as I've been told many times, it's always better to ask than to assume. So reach out and ask. And, you know, the other thing I'd like to add to all this is plan ahead. You know, you're doing research, you're writing, you know you want to use something. The minute you're thinking about it, reach out to somebody. Don't wait until 2 days before the submission is due to come and say, hey, I want to, you know, use this. Can I use this? It may take time to get permission. There was a time where I wanted to use some resources from the WHO, and at that time, all of their work was copyrighted. A lot of their work is not anymore. It literally took me 7 weeks to get permission to use a small piece of their work. And so you have to think about also the receiving organization and how long it's going to take for them to respond, the coordination between ROGC, them, and any other issues that may come up. This is not what I would say is a quick process, but it's a process that can be navigated to a resolution that's going to help you get to where you want to be into that yes factor. I don't know if Sarah wants or Dr. Longacre wants to add anything to that. Even other organizations may require you to get approval to use their materials, or to record somebody, or to take something off of their site. For example, you know, I see Dr. Randall's on here. NASA has some pretty heavy requirements about using their materials, about you getting their speakers. You may have seen a piece where Dr. Morgan is coming and talking to us. A lot of that, though not copyright specific, requires time and planning. So, you know, just like any other thing that happens, there are things we need to check out, and we need to protect ourselves. This is part of why copyright is here, is to protect you as well as authors. Again, you have, yes, Dr. Longacre.
I'm going to head out, get another call. Thank you again. I want to thank everybody participating, and I would imagine that we'll have a follow-up 2 or 3. So thank you very much for putting this all together. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Longacre. If there are no more questions, we'll wrap up here. I'll give somebody a minute or 2 to come off mute. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Robin. Just know you have resources here and people willing to help or send you to the correct person who can help.